So this is where it is anatomically in the skull. So I'm going to take it out of here so that we can see it, work with it here. Okay. So the sphenoid is a fairly complex bone. Embryologically, I think you start with like 3 different parts, 3 or 4 parts of it. So you start with the body of the sphenoid, which embryologically is your first vertebrae. So the body of the sphenoid is actually like the function of the first vertebrae, and then the wings start as separate centers of ossification, separate from the body, and these are the greater wings of the sphenoid, and then these are the lesser wings of the sphenoid. And if you look at it from the front, I think it looks like a moth, right? Well, you got the wings, and these would be the antennas, and then here's the legs of the moth, and the nose of the moth, and everything. Now, again, this model is defective in that there's supposed to be bone across here, and another kind of arced rib of bone here that the vomer attaches to. So that's missing in this model, unfortunately. But you can see it in textbooks and stuff. But so the Chinese call it the butterfly bone, but I think it looks more like a moth. But and right behind the sphenoid is the sphenobasilar joint, and like we talked about with at the beginning, Sutherland assigned this as the primary joint in the body. This is the primary joint and it's the base of the skull, and we're going to spend a lot of time with the sphenobasilar joint later on. Okay, so but if you look at the sphenoid and you look at the articulations that it has, so obviously it articulates with the occiput, right? And it articulates in the front with the frontal bone, and it articulates a lot with the temporal bone, and you might not know it back here. What does it articulate with back here along the petrous? Yeah. Well, it does, I think, articulate with that up here, but down here are the palatines.
Okay.
Remember the palatines? Yeah. We'll work with those two in a couple months. So you got the palatines. This is frontal here, frontal along here, usually temporal along here, and then back here. Remember, there's these sutures back here that we often forget about, and that's where the temporal bone turns and goes in, and see it fits up in there. Okay, so now the temporal sphenoidal suture in the front is a pretty solid suture. Okay, but the temporal occipital suture in the back is mostly open space, and that's to let the venous drainage out of the head. So that's there's not a lot of you don't often get a lot of restrictions back here, but you do often get restrictions here. So remember that suture exists, because a lot of people forget and then don't work it very well. Okay, so this is a complex bone, but to treat it initially, at least for today, well, all we're going to do is called the sphenoid lift. Okay, and so it sits in the skull like this, and we're going to use the first vault hold to do the sphenoid lift. We talked about that first vault hold, remember? So that's where you put your little fingers back here on the occiput, and then you put your thumbs on that sweet spot. Okay? And if from here you just listened to feel the cranial rhythm, what would you feel?
Flexion is going like this, extension.
Yeah, so if I'm just looking at my thumbs and little fingers, flexion, it's moving away from me, and I feel my thumbs and fingers moving closer together. and then extension is opposite. It's coming back towards me and moving wider apart. So it turns out being able to sense your thumbs and fingers moving apart is really a delicate sense, so we can detect very small motions that way. But the important thing to remember is to have your little finger. So this line across here on the occiput is where the neck muscles attach. So you want your little finger down as close to that attachment as possible. Because what's going to happen if you have your little finger up here on the vertical part of the occiput, what is it doing during flexion? Yeah, it's moving in. So basically what you would feel then is this kind of motion instead of this kind of motion. You'd feel it rock like that. And the reason we don't want that is that's actually a sign of a specific kind of sphenobasilar restriction that we'll talk about next time. So you don't want to mistakenly think they have that kind of restriction when they don't. So finger placement is really important for this, for the first vault hold.
So can you just explain what the thumbs and the fingers are doing on flexion? Okay, so on flexion,
Flexion, they're moving away from me and getting closer together.
closer together and moving away.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I'm sitting at the person's head, and their head's, top of their head's towards my belly. Okay? Just like that. If everything's going okay with the sphenobasilar joint. Okay? So for today, all we're going to do to release the sphenoid is tune into it like that and invite the greater wings towards the ceiling. So that's essentially a sphenobasilar decompression. Is what we're going to do today. Okay? Sphenobasilar decompression. So, and if you come on the sphenoid and just ask it towards the ceiling, a lot of times it'll start triggering unwinding. So who would like to volunteer?